So here's what's going on with the Ryan Upchurch and his ex-manager Chelsea situation. And the goal here is to be completely straight about it, because most of the conversation happening around this hasn't been balanced at all. Nobody seems to be calling out what's real and what isn't with any kind of fairness. There's a lot of noise coming from every direction, but very little actual honesty cutting through the middle of it. And that's exactly what needs to happen here, because this situation deserves a much closer and more honest look than most people have been willing to give it so far. Starting with Chelsea. By most accounts, this person was barely functioning as a manager in any meaningful sense of the word. The role appears to have been more of a performance than anything else, carefully projecting the image of someone who understood the industry, knew how the business worked, and had the connections and experience to back it all up, while staying quietly focused behind the scenes on what they could personally extract from the position. And that alone would already be a serious problem. But then things get significantly worse from there. Chelsea admitted on camera, openly, on record, to going into the job with the deliberate intention of secretly recording things from the very beginning. Walked in essentially wearing a wire from day one, before a single conversation had even taken place, and then turned around after leaving and released a video packed with what are being widely described as completely fabricated claims about Upchurch, serious reputation-damaging allegations, while having the audacity to place an entertainment purposes only disclaimer at the very top of the video, as if that kind of language provides any genuine legal protection or moral justification for spreading harmful and damaging lies about a real person with a real career and a real audience watching. Take a moment and think about what that actually means. This is someone who openly admitted to recording private conversations without consent, who was publicly praising their own contributions and calling their work outstanding right up until the precise moment they received any form of criticism, and then the instant that criticism arrived, immediately pivoted to doxing, releasing personal private information publicly without permission, and flooding inboxes with threatening messages directed at anyone who dared to speak honestly about what actually happened in this situation. The doxing alone communicates everything a reasonable person needs to know about the character of the individual involved here. That is not the behavior of someone operating from a place of legitimate grievance, pursuing accountability through honest and transparent means. That is the behavior of someone who felt the heat of being called out, felt the ground shifting under them, and reacted by throwing absolutely everything available at the wall in the hope that something would stick and redirect attention away from their own conduct. And the threats and intimidation tactics didn't stop at doxing either. Multiple threatening messages came pouring in from various accounts and directions, warning that people were actively waiting for a public live stream appearance, specifically to show up and cause real harm. Physical threats. Over what exactly? Over the decision to be honest and transparent about a situation witnessed firsthand. Every bit of that backlash, every threatening message, every act of intimidation, all of it apparently triggered entirely and solely by the choice to tell the truth about what was actually going on behind the scenes of this whole arrangement.
Now, here is precisely the point where the credibility on Chelsea's side completely collapses under the weight of its own contradictions. Screenshots of private text message conversations were gathered up and released to the public, presented as definitive and damning proof of wrongdoing and misconduct. But here is the detail that changes everything. Those screenshots were not released in full. Positive exchanges, favorable messages, context that would have directly complicated or undermined the narrative Chelsea was actively trying to construct and sell to an audience. All of it was quietly and deliberately deleted before anything was made public. And what the remaining screenshots actually show, clearly, plainly, and without any meaningful ambiguity, is a simple and straightforward confirmation that the researcher involved was hired specifically and explicitly to complete a timeline documentary project for Ryan Upchurch. That is the entirety of what those messages confirm, nothing more and nothing less than that. So at this point, the situation really only allows for two possible conclusions. Either Chelsea knew with absolute certainty what the professional arrangement was from the beginning and made the conscious choice to misrepresent it publicly anyway, or was so thoroughly and completely disconnected from the actual day-to-day operational reality of their own management role that they genuinely had no idea what the people working around them had been hired and contracted to do. Neither of those possibilities reflects well on anyone trying to position themselves as a credible and honest source of information. And the deliberate, calculated, selective release of those screenshots, carefully, surgically removing everything that reflected positively while preserving only the fragments that could be twisted and reframed to support a predetermined conclusion, stands as one of the clearest and most obvious demonstrations of bad faith visible anywhere in this entire situation. Because the messages told the complete story in full and unambiguous detail. They laid out precisely what work had been agreed upon, when it was planned to begin, what the full scope of the project looked like, and when the completed deliverable was expected to be ready. Every single logistical and professional detail was confirmed explicitly in writing between the parties involved. And Chelsea gathered all of that documented, time-stamped, written evidence and then presented an entirely and fundamentally different version of events to the public when the time came to go on the offensive. So at that point, there is genuinely no interpretive gray area remaining anywhere in this story. Everything being claimed publicly is directly and demonstrably contradicted by the written documentation that exists, and that paper trail makes the truth available to anyone willing to look at it honestly and without a predetermined agenda. This is not a miscommunication between two parties who remember the same events differently. This is not a genuine disagreement rooted in differing interpretations of an ambiguous arrangement. This is a deliberate and calculated lie, told publicly and on the record about a real person with real consequences attached to their name and reputation. And deliberate public lies of that specific nature and magnitude, directly contradicted by existing written documentation, are precisely the kind of situation that results in legal action being pursued and defamation claims being filed. And then came the victim narrative, arriving right on schedule and exactly as predictably as anyone familiar with this type of situation would have anticipated. The sudden and dramatic shift in tone and posture. Why would someone as prominent and established as Upchurch direct any attention towards someone as small and insignificant as me? What possible threat could I realistically represent to someone operating at that level of success? Why would anyone bother coming after little old me with legal resources and public attention? Here is the direct and straightforward answer to every version of that question. If the statements being made publicly were grounded in actual truth, if the allegations carried any genuine factual foundation that could withstand scrutiny and verification, there would be no lawsuit being pursued. Nobody invests the substantial time, financial resources, legal energy, and public attention that formal legal action requires simply to respond to accurate and truthful statements made about them. That is not how defamation law operates in practice, and it is not how rational and strategically minded individuals handle truthful criticism directed at them. The legal action exists for one clear and specific reason, because the statements being made publicly are not true and cannot be substantiated with real, verifiable evidence. Anyone who encounters that victim framing and finds themselves genuinely persuaded by it needs to examine more carefully the underlying logic they are choosing to accept without sufficient critical scrutiny.
And the content operation being run in the aftermath is completely and almost transparently obvious to any observer paying even minimal attention to what is actually happening. Multiple videos uploaded every single day, 5, 6, 7 pieces of content per day, all framed as devastating new exposés revealing some previously unknown truth about Upchurch, none of them containing any independently verified information, none of them presenting anything that constitutes genuine evidence capable of supporting the claims being advanced. Just the same recycled collection of unverifiable allegations repackaged repeatedly with different presentation, the same manufactured sense of outrage and scandal carefully constructed to create the appearance of substance, the